The message came at midnight when Commander Marcus Cole was drinking alone in his quarters aboard the damaged warship, Relentless. He had been doing this every night since the battle at Proxima Station, where 37 of his crew died in a fight. That should never have happened. A first contact situation gone wrong, and now humanity faced the wrath of the Valori Empire. The Valori were ancient when humans were still learning to make fire, and they ruled over 200 star systems with absolute power. Marcus read the message 3 times before he believed it. He was being summoned to Earth, and then to the Valori throne world, as part of a peace delegation. 3 weeks later, he stood in a conference room in Geneva while admirals and politicians explained his new mission. "The Valori have made their demands clear," said Admiral Chun with a face like stone. "We pay tribute for the next century, and we accept technological restrictions, and we provide a political marriage." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "A marriage," he repeated, "between a human of military rank and a member of their imperial family." The Admiral continued, "They specifically requested someone from the Proxima engagement, and you are the highest-ranking survivor, Commander Cole." "You mean I am the most expendable?" Marcus said. Nobody in the room denied it. He had no family. Left after the colony ship disaster 10 years ago, and no political connections worth protecting, and no future beyond another decade of war. He was perfect for disposal. The journey to the Valori throne world took 6 weeks through a network of alien jump gates that humanity had only recently been permitted to use. Marcus spent the time studying everything known about Valori culture and biology and history. They lived for nearly 1,000 years on average, and they stood almost 7 feet tall with silver blue skin and eyes that shifted color with their emotions, and they considered themselves the most perfect species in the galaxy. Humans were insects to them at best and dangerous vermin at worst. The throne world was called Valor Prime, and it made Earth look like a small village. Cities of crystal and light stretched across entire continents, and ships moved through the sky like flocks of birds, and everything was beautiful in a cold and perfect way. Marcus was taken to the Imperial Palace, which was larger than most human cities, and made to wait in a chamber for 3 days before anyone spoke to him. When they finally brought him before the Emperor, he had to fight every instinct not to run. Emperor Kalen Vensora sat on a throne of living crystal that pulsed with soft light, and he looked down at Marcus like a man examining an insect he was deciding whether to crush. "This is the human," the Emperor said in a voice that echoed through the massive hall. "Yes, Divine Majesty," said a court official, Commander Marcus Cole of the Earth Defense Force. The Emperor made a sound that might have been amusement or disgust. "Small," he said. "Fragile and short-lived and small, but perhaps that is fitting." Marcus said nothing because he had been told that speaking without permission was punishable by death. "You will wed my youngest daughter," the Emperor announced. "The ceremony will take place in 3 days, and then you will leave this world and never return, and the matter between our peoples will be considered settled." Marcus bowed because that was the only response permitted. He was taken to another waiting chamber and left there until someone came to prepare him for meeting his bride. Her name was Princess Kelith Vinsora, and she was the 7th daughter of the Emperor, and when Marcus first saw her, he was surprised. She was small for a Valori, standing barely 6 feet tall, and her silver blue skin was paler than the others he had seen, and she held herself like someone trying to take up as little space as possible. The court officials who brought them together did not hide their contempt for her. "The princess will greet her intended," one of them said in a tone that made it clear this was an order, not a suggestion. Kelith looked at Marcus with eyes that shifted from deep purple to pale gray, and she said nothing for a long moment. Marcus could hear whispers from the courtiers watching from the edges of the room. "Defective." Someone murmured. "Cursed," said another. "A fitting match for an animal," laughed a third. Kelith's expression did not change, but Marcus saw her hands tighten at her sides. I will not apologize," she said finally. Her voice was quiet but clear. And Marcus did not understand what she meant. Was she apologizing for the marriage, or refusing to apologize for something else entirely? Before he could ask, she turned and walked away, and the court officials hurried him back to his chamber. The next 3 days passed in a blur of ceremonies and rituals that Marcus barely understood. He was bathed in scented oils and dressed in robes that weighed more than his combat armor, and taught words in the Valori language that he had to repeat perfectly or face punishment. Through it all, he caught only glimpses of Kelith, and she never looked at him directly. The wedding itself was nothing like any human ceremony Marcus had ever seen. There was no celebration or joy or even acknowledgement that two people were joining their lives together. Instead, it felt like a business transaction conducted in a freezing room with hundreds of witnesses who clearly wished they were anywhere else. Kelith stood beside him in robes of deep blue and spoke her vows in a voice so quiet he could barely hear her. When they were pronounced married, the emperor did not even attend the final blessing. His absence was a message that everyone understood. This marriage meant nothing, and this daughter meant nothing, and this human meant nothing. After the ceremony, Marcus and Kelith were escorted to a shuttle that would take them to their new home, small agricultural moon on the far edge of Valori space, where they would live out their exile together. As the shuttle lifted off and the throne world shrank behind them, Kelith finally spoke to him again. "You should not have agreed to this," she said without looking at him. "I did not have much choice." Marcus replied. "No," she said, and something in her voice sounded almost like pity. "I suppose neither of us did." The shuttle carried them through the darkness between stars, and Marcus wondered what kind of life awaited them on the other side. He had expected to feel angry or trapped or desperate, but instead, he felt something else. Curious, because Kelith Vensura was clearly not what her family wanted him to believe she was. And Marcus Cole had survived too many impossible situations to accept the obvious answer. Something was wrong here, and he intended to find out what. The moon was called Verith, and it was beautiful in a simple way that the throne world had not been. Green fields stretched to the horizon, and small villages dotted the landscape, and the sky was a soft purple color that Marcus found strangely peaceful. Their home was a manor house at the edge of a farming community, and it came with a small staff of servants who clearly considered this assignment a punishment. The first month was difficult. Kelith kept to herself in her private chambers, and Marcus explored the grounds and tried to understand what his life had become. They ate meals in silence at opposite ends of a long table, and spoke only when necessary, and avoided each other like strangers sharing a train car. Marcus began to think this was simply how things would be forever. Two people trapped in a meaningless marriage, slowly growing old in quiet isolation. Then he started to notice things. Kelith woke before dawn every morning, and Marcus discovered this only because he suffered from nightmares that kept him from sleeping. He would walk the halls in the early hours and see light coming from under her door and hear the soft sounds of movement inside. One morning, he passed the library and found her surrounded by books and data screens, all focused on the same subject, humanity. She was studying human languages, and she had already mastered 3 of them, including English and Mandarin and Arabic. She was reading human history from the earliest civilizations to the present day and taking detailed notes on everything. She was examining human biology with the intensity of a scientist preparing for a major experiment. Marcus watched from the doorway for several minutes before she noticed him. "You are awake early," she said without any surprise in her voice. "I could say the same about you," Marcus replied. "What is all this?" Kelith hesitated, like she was deciding how much to reveal. "Research," she said finally. "I believe in understanding those around me." It was not a real answer, but Marcus let it go for now. Over the following weeks, he observed her more carefully, and what he saw confused him. She worked constantly, but not at the idle pursuits he expected from royalty when a disease struck the bus. Local livestock, she spent 4 days without sleep developing a treatment, and she delivered it herself to every affected farm. When the servants made mistakes, she corrected them gently instead of punishing them, and the shock on their faces told. Marcus, this was not normal behavior for a Valori noble. When a child from the village wandered onto the manor grounds lost and frightened, Caliph found her and walked her home herself, and stayed to make sure the family had everything they needed. "Why do you do these things?" Marcus asked her one evening. They were sitting in the garden watching the twin suns set, and it was one of the first times they had spent together willingly. "What things?" Caliph asked. "Help people when no one is watching and when there is nothing to gain from it." Caliph turned to look at him, and her eyes shifted to a deep blue color he had not seen before. "Is that unusual to you?" "For a Valori princess, yes." Marcus said honestly, "Your people do not seem to value kindness very highly." Something flickered across her face, and Marcus thought it might have been pain. "No," she said quietly, "they do not." She stood and left without another word, and Marcus knew he had touched something sensitive, but he could not stop wondering about her. The servants began to talk to Marcus once they realized he would not report them for speaking freely. "The princess is different," said Vuran, an elderly Valori who managed the household. "She has always been different, and her family never forgave her for it." "Different how?" Marcus asked. Vuran glanced around to make sure they were alone. "She cares," he said, like it was a shameful secret. "About everyone and everything, and among our people that is considered a weakness and a flaw and something to be corrected." Marcus thought about this for days afterward. He started making small gestures toward Caliph, trying to bridge the distance between them. He prepared a human meal for her, using ingredients he had requested from Earth, and she tasted everything with genuine curiosity. He found a book of human poetry in the library and left it where she would find it, and a week later, he saw her reading it in the garden. He simply sat with her, sometimes not speaking, just being present, and she seemed confused by this at first, but slowly she stopped leaving when he appeared. One night, a ship arrived from the throne world carrying official documents, and Caliph changed completely. She became small and quiet and nervous in a way Marcus had never seen, and she flinched every time someone mentioned the imperial court. When the ship left, she locked herself in her chambers for 2 days. Marcus finally knocked on her door on the third morning. "Go away," she said through the door. "No," Marcus replied, and he sat down in the hallway outside her room and waited. 3 hours later, the door opened. Caliph stood there looking exhausted and fragile, and younger than he had ever seen her look. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Being kind to me when there is nothing to gain, and when no one is watching, and when I have given you no reason to care." Marcus stood up slowly. "Because something is very wrong," he said, "and I think you have been carrying it alone for a very long time, and I think you deserve better than that." Caliph stared at him with eyes that shifted through a dozen colors he could not name. "You do not know anything about me," she whispered. "Then tell me," Marcus said. "Help me understand, because I am not going anywhere, and I would rather spend this exile as your friend than as your stranger." For a long moment she said nothing, then slowly, like a wall beginning to crack, she started to cry. Marcus had never seen a Valori cry before, and he did not know what to do, so he simply stood there and let her know she was not alone. It was not much, but it was a beginning, and in the weeks that followed, Caliph began to let him in just a little bit more each day. She did not tell him her secrets yet, but she stopped hiding from him, and that, Marcus decided, was progress enough for now. The message came 6 months after they arrived on Vareth, and it brought their fragile peace crashing down. Princess Saralyn, the third eldest daughter of the Emperor, had died in what the official report called a tragic accident. All members of the imperial family were required to attend the funeral rites on the throne world. Calith received the news in silence, and her face became a mask that revealed nothing. "I have to go," she told Marcus, "and you must come with me because that is what will be expected." Marcus watched her pack her belongings and saw how her hands trembled. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She stopped moving for a moment. "Yes," she admitted. "I am always afraid when I go back there." They traveled for 3 weeks through the jump gate network, and with each passing day, Marcus watched Calith shrink into herself. The woman who had worked beside farmers and healed sick animals and walked lost children. Home disappeared. In her place was someone small and silent and desperately trying to be invisible when they arrived at the throne world. Marcus finally understood why the other princesses were waiting to greet them at the palace entrance, and they looked at Calith with open hatred and contempt. "Little sister," said Princess Valane the eldest with a smile that held no warmth. "How generous of you to leave your human pet and join us." "The journey was long," said Princess Kiranan the second eldest. "She looks even more pathetic than usual." The remaining sisters laughed, and Calith said nothing and kept her eyes on the ground. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but Calith touched his arm in warning. "Do not," she whispered. "It will only make things worse." The funeral rites lasted 5 days, and they were elaborate and cold, and Marcus understood almost nothing of what happened, but he watched everything carefully. He watched how the emperor acknowledged each of his surviving daughters with praise and pride, except for Calith, who he looked through like she was made of glass. He watched how the courtiers treated her like she carried a disease that might spread if they got too close. He watched how her sisters found small ways to humiliate her at every opportunity, and how she accepted it all without complaint, like someone who had long ago stopped expecting anything different. On the 3rd day, Marcus was separated from Calith during a ceremony, and he found himself wandering the palace corridors alone. He was looking for a way back to their assigned chambers, when he took a wrong turn and ended up in a section of the palace that was clearly restricted. Guards were supposed to be stationed at every entrance, but this one was empty, and Marcus could not resist the temptation to explore. He found himself in an archive filled with crystal records and holographic displays, and he started searching for anything that might explain what was happening with Calith. What he found made him feel sick. The records were labeled Project Reflection, and they contained detailed medical and genetic information about the imperial family, and they revealed a truth that changed everything. Marcus thought he knew Calith was not the 7th daughter of the emperor. She was the only daughter. The 6 elder sisters were not her siblings at all, and they were copies created from her genetic template through advanced Valori cloning technology. They called it Reflection, and it was used to create backup heirs when the original was deemed unsuitable. And Calith had been deemed unsuitable at age 12 because she showed compassion toward other species and questioned the rightness of Valori supremacy and refused to believe that aliens were inferior. The reports described her as defective and dangerous and unfit to rule. So they replaced her 6 times. They created new daughters from her genetic material and gave each one the life and status and future that should have been hers. And they kept Calith alive only as a contingency, because they might need her genetic material again someday. She was not a princess. She was spare parts. Marcus read further and discovered the truth about the marriage. It was never meant to be a political gesture or a peace offering. It was a final disposal. By marrying Calith to a human, they could remove her from Valori society permanently without the scandal of executing a member of the imperial bloodline. They had thrown her away like garbage and dressed it up as diplomacy. Marcus stood in that archive for a long time, feeling something cold and hard forming in his chest. He had been angry before in his life, and he had been sad and afraid and desperate. But he had never felt anything like this. This was rage so pure and focused that it burned away everything else. He left the archive and found his way back to their chambers and waited for Calith to return. She arrived, Late in the evening, looking exhausted and beaten down in a way that broke his heart. "Marcus," she said with confusion when she saw his face. "What happened?" He looked at her and saw not a defective princess, but a woman who had been tortured by her own family for the crime of being kind. "I know," he said quietly. "I know everything, and I know what they did to you, and I know what you are." Caliph went very still. "What I am," she repeated. "The only real daughter of the Emperor, and the original that they copied 6 times, and the woman they threw away because you had the audacity to believe that other species have value." Her eyes widened and filled with tears. "How did you find out?" "I found their records," Marcus said. "The ones they call Project Reflection." Caliph sank onto the bed like her legs could no longer support her. "Then you know why they hate me," she whispered. "Why they have always hated me, because I am proof of what they really are and what they have done." Marcus knelt in front of her. "They did not send you away because you were broken," he said. "They sent you away because you were better than them, and they could not stand it. And they could not bear to look at the original while they celebrated their copies." Caliph looked at him with eyes full of pain and hope and fear. "Do not think I am defective. I think you are the most remarkable person I have ever met," Marcus said, "and I will not let them get away with this." "What can you do?" she asked. "You are one human against an empire," Marcus smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "I am a survivor," he said, "and I have friends who owe me favors, and I have learned how to fight enemies who are bigger and stronger and more powerful than me, and I have never once given up on someone worth saving." He took her hands in his. "I will find a way," he promised. "I do not know how yet, but I swear to you that I will find a way to make this right." For the first time since they had arrived on the throne world, Caliph smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real. And Marcus knew in that moment that he would burn down the entire empire, if that was what it took to protect that smile. They returned to Verith after the funeral rites, and everything was different. Caliph no longer hid from Marcus, and she no longer pretended that nothing was wrong. Instead, she told him everything. She spoke of her childhood in the palace, where she had been curious and bright, and full of questions about the universe beyond Valori space. She spoke of the moment when she was 12 years old, and met her first alien servant, and felt compassion for them instead of disgust. She spoke of the tests. They ran on her brain, looking for damage or disease, or some explanation for why she could not hate properly. She spoke of the day they told her she was being replaced, and the day she watched her first reflection receive the crown that should have been hers. She spoke of the years of isolation and experiments and being kept alive only because her genetic material might be useful. She spoke of watching 5 more copies of herself be created and celebrated while she was forgotten in a corner of the palace like an embarrassing secret. "I thought if I was quiet enough and small enough, they would eventually forget I existed," she told Marcus one night as they sat together in the garden. "I thought that was the best I could hope for, because at least then they would stop hurting me." Marcus listened to it all, and with each word his determination grew stronger. "They did not send you away because you were broken," he said again, because she needed to hear it. "They sent you away because you threatened everything they believed, and because kindness is dangerous to people who rule through cruelty." Caliph looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain. "But what can we do against them and against an empire that has existed for 10,000 years?" Marcus smiled. "We start small," he said, "and we build something bigger." Over the following months, Marcus began reaching out to his old contacts in the Earth Defense Force. He was careful because he knew the Valori monitored communications from this moon, but he had learned long ago how to send messages that looked innocent. Old friends from his military days responded with curiosity, and then with interest, and then with determination. Human intelligence networks began quietly investigating the Valori reflection program, and they found evidence that it was not as secret as the Emperor believed. Other species had heard rumors and whispers, and they were willing to share what they knew in exchange for promises of future cooperation. Marcus also reached out to representatives of other alien species who lived under Valori rule. The Kelani, who had been conquered 3 centuries ago and were still treated as second-class citizens. The Varth, who had surrendered to avoid extinction and had never been allowed to forget their defeat. The Morel, who served as laborers and servants throughout the Empire and dreamed of something better. All of them had suffered under Valori arrogance, and all of them were interested in the possibility of change. "You are building an alliance," Caliph said when she realized what he was doing. "I am building leverage," Marcus corrected. "The Valori believe they are untouchable because no single species can threaten them. But what happens when a dozen species start working together?" Caliph stared at him with something like awe. "You would risk everything for this. I would risk everything for you," Marcus said simply. "Because you are worth it, and because what they did to you was wrong, and because I am tired of watching good people suffer while monsters sit on thrones." As the months passed, their alliance grew stronger, and information about the reflection program began to spread through diplomatic channels. Carefully worded questions were asked in trade negotiations, and subtle rumors began to circulate in foreign courts. The Valori had built their empire on the myth of their genetic superiority and their divine right to rule. But what happened when people learned that their current heirs were copies of a girl they threw away for being too kind? Meanwhile, Caliph began to change in ways that Marcus had hoped for, but never expected. She stopped shrinking and hiding and trying to be invisible. She started speaking her mind and making decisions and taking up space in the world. She began working with Marcus on his plans, offering insights into Valori culture and politics that he could never have understood on his own. She was not just surviving anymore. She was preparing to fight. "I spent so long believing what they told me about myself," she said one day, "that I was defective and wrong and broken. But you made me see that the opposite was true and that my compassion was never a weakness, added. Was the only thing that made me better than them." Marcus watched her stand tall with fire in her eyes, and he knew that the quiet exile they had been sent to was about to end. Word reached them that questions were being asked on the throne world about the legitimacy of the imperial heirs. The Vai reflections were facing scrutiny for the first time in their existence, and the emperor was furious. "He will come for us," Caliph said. "He will not allow this to continue." "I know," Marcus agreed, "but that is what I am counting on." "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled up a star map showing the positions of ships from a dozen different species, all positioned at key points throughout Valori space. "The Emperor thinks he is dealing with a disposable human soldier and a defective daughter," Marcus said. "He has no idea that he is facing a coalition that has been preparing for this moment for almost a year." Caliph looked at the map and then at Marcus. "You planned this from the beginning." "I planned to protect you from the beginning," Marcus said. "Everything else grew from that, and I called in every favor and contacted every friend and built every alliance. I could because I knew that eventually they would come for us, and I wanted to be ready." Caliph was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why did you do all of this for me when I was nothing but a burden you were forced to carry?" Marcus took her hands in his. "Because you were never a burden," he said. "Because from the moment I met you, I could see that you were something special, and because I made a promise to protect you, and I intend to keep it." Caliph's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of pain. "Marcus," she whispered. "When they come for us," Marcus said, "we will be ready, and we will not just survive, and we will win." 3 days later, the Emperor's fleet appeared in orbit around Varath. The reckoning had begun. The Emperor's flagship descended through the purple skies of Varath with an escort of 50 warships. It was a show of force meant to terrify, and it would have worked if Marcus had not been expecting it. "Commander Cole," came the Emperor's voice through their communication system. You will surrender yourself and the princess immediately, and you will face judgment for your crimes against the Empire." Marcus looked at Keleth, who stood beside him calm and steady. What crimes would those be? Marcus replied, "Treason," the Emperor thundered. "Conspiracy and spreading lies about the imperial family and undermining the stability of the Empire. The only lies here are the ones you have been telling for decades," Marcus said. "The lies about your daughters and about your bloodline and about the girl you threw away because she was too good for you." There was silence on the other end. "You know nothing, human. I know everything," Marcus said. "And so does everyone else, because I have spent the last year making sure of it." As if on cue, ships began appearing around. Virith in numbers that dwarfed the Emperor's fleet, human vessels from the Earth Defense Force and Kelani, cruisers in Vorath, battleships and Morel transports all arriving through the jump gates in a coordinated display of unity. "What is this?" the Emperor demanded. "This is what happens when you underestimate the people you consider inferior," Marcus said. "This is a coalition of species who are tired of Valori arrogance and Valori cruelty and Valori lies." The Emperor's face appeared on their screen, twisted with fury. "You think this changes anything, and you think a rabble of lesser species can threaten the Empire. I think the truth has a way of changing everything," Marcus replied. "And the truth about Project Reflection is spreading across the galaxy right now." He nodded to Keleth, who stepped forward to address her father for the first time. "The people of Valor are learning that their precious princesses are copies," she said in a voice that did not waver. "Copies of a girl you discarded because she believed that other species deserved respect. And they are learning that you replaced your only daughter 6 times because she had the audacity to show compassion." The Emperor's expression flickered. "You are defective," he spat. "You were always defective and unsuitable and unworthy. I was unsuitable for your kind of rule." Keleth agreed, "Because I could never hate the way you wanted me to, and I could never believe that cruelty was strength or that kindness was weakness." On the Throne World, broadcasts were being transmitted to every screen and every device on the planet. The records from Project Reflection were displayed for all to see, along with evidence that had been gathered over months of careful investigation. The Valori people, who prided themselves on honor and genetic purity and the sacred nature of their bloodline, were watching their entire worldview collapse. The Reflections were not true heirs. They were copies of a princess who had been erased from history for the crime of being kind. "You have destroyed yourself," the Emperor snarled at Marcus. "Do you think I will let any of you leave this system alive? I think you have bigger problems," Marcus said. Reports were coming in from across the Empire, riots in the capital city as citizens demanded answers. Military commanders refusing orders as they questioned everything they had been told, council members calling for the Emperor's removal. The foundations of power that had held for 10,000 years were cracking. 3 weeks later, the Emperor was deposed by his own council in a vote that was not even close. The Reflections, who had been raised to believe they were destined to rule, found themselves delegitimized and powerless, and Keleth was summoned to the Throne World, not as an exile or a prisoner, but as the only true heir to the Valori throne. Marcus stood beside her as she faced the council of nobles and politicians who had once looked through her like she did not exist. "Princess Keleth," said the senior council member, "you are the legitimate heir by blood and by birthright, and we offer you the throne of the Valori Empire." The chamber fell silent as everyone waited for her answer. Keleth looked at Marcus, and he saw no fear in her eyes anymore. "No," she said. Shock rippled through the assembly. "I do not want to rule over anyone," Keleth continued. "I never did, and that was always the truth about me that my father could not accept." She stepped forward and addressed the entire chamber. "I propose something different instead of another emperor," she said. "I propose a council of species where Valori sit as members rather than masters, and where decisions are made together rather than imposed from above." "That is unprecedented," said the council member. Yes, Keleth agreed. It is. And that is exactly why we need it, because the old ways led to project, reflection, and to the disposal of children who showed compassion, and to an empire built on cruelty and lies. The debate lasted for weeks, but in the end Keleth's proposal passed by a narrow margin. The deciding votes came from humanity and from the other species who had joined Marcus's coalition. The Valori Empire, as it had existed for 10,000 years, was over. In its place, something new was beginning 5 years later. Marcus and Keleth stood on the balcony of their home, watching ships from 100 worlds cross the sky. They lived at the headquarters of the Interspecies Council now, and not on an exile moon, but in the heart of something they had helped create together. "Do you ever regret it?" Keleth asked him. "Regret what?" "Being married to me when it was never really your choice in the beginning." Marcus thought about the question seriously. He thought about the man he had been when this started, broken and bitter and waiting to die. He thought about everything that had happened since and everything they had built together. "It was not my choice at first," he admitted. "And it was not yours either, but somewhere along the way it became something we both chose." He took her hand in his. "I would choose it again," he said, "every time without hesitation." Keleth smiled, and it was radiant and warm and full of joy. "Humans," she said softly, "you really are the strangest species in the galaxy. And yet you like us anyway." "I do," she admitted. "I always did, and that was the whole problem that started all of this." Marcus laughed and pulled her close. "Their problem," he said, "never ours." Above them, ships continued to move across the stars, carrying beings from worlds that had never cooperated before. A galaxy was changing because one princess had refused to see aliens as lesser beings, and because one human had refused to let her kindness be destroyed. The end of one story, the beginning of something much bigger, and proof that compassion was never a defect. It was the most powerful force in the universe.